Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. Alina had never considered herself reckless. She had lived her life by the rules, married young to a man who ticked all the boxes, raised 2 children, and built a home that looked perfect from the outside. Thomas, her husband, was a good man, provider, loyal, predictable. Their life together was structured, neat, and quiet. Almost too quiet. Her son Daniel had just turned 20. He was in college but still visited home often. His best friend, Caleb, practically grew up in their house too. Always around, always polite, always with those watchful eyes that seemed to see right through her dot. It was a summer evening when it all began unraveling. Thomas was out of town for work again, and Caleb had stayed over after a BBQ in their backyard. Alina hadn't planned anything. In fact, she had every intention of keeping her distance. But something about the wine, the stillness of the house, and the soft flicker of candlelight made the air feel different. Caleb had grown into a man. Strong jawline, quiet confidence, a presence that unnerved her in ways she didn't want to admit. He helped her clean up after the party, loading dishes while she dried. Their hands brushed, once, twice, and then he looked at her, really looked. "You're not happy," he said softly, as if it were a truth he'd been holding for a while. Alina laughed it off. "I'm married." He nodded, stepping closer. "Doesn't mean you're happy." She should have walked away. But something inside her cracked, a small, aching part that had been ignored for too long. She didn't speak. Didn't stop him when he reached out, gently, carefully, like he was testing the space between what was right and what was real. That night was a storm of emotions. Fear, guilt, want, and something deeper. It wasn't just about the heat of the moment. It was about being seen, touched, remembered. Afterward, they didn't speak. The morning light was too harsh, the silence too heavy. Caleb left before Daniel even woke up, and Alina sat on the edge of her bed for what felt like hours, staring at her reflection in the mirror, a woman she barely recognized. She told herself it would never happen again, that it had been a mistake. But the days that followed were torture. Caleb messaged her, short, respectful, but full of unspoken things. She ignored them, deleted them, but the ache remained. Weeks passed. Thomas returned unaware. Life resumed its rhythm. But Alina was offbeat, always a second too late in conversation, a touch too distant in bed. Guilt clung to her skin like sweat. Then Caleb showed up again. This time, it wasn't an accident. He came by when he knew Daniel would be gone. His eyes met hers with a quiet urgency. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said. Not because it was forbidden, but because it felt real. Alina wanted to push him away, wanted to scream at him for making it worse. But when she opened her mouth, all she could say was, "Neither can I." It wasn't just lust. That's what made it worse. It was the way he made her laugh, the way he asked about her dreams, the way he remembered her favorite books and brought her one she hadn't read in years. It was the way he told her she was still beautiful, still wanted. They met again and again, always in stolen hours with guilt like shadows on the walls. Alina lived in a dual reality, wife by day, secret by night. The weight of betrayal grew unbearable until the night everything changed. Daniel was coming home early. A surprise weekend visit. Thomas was out, and Alina, unaware of her son's return, had let Caleb in again. They were in the kitchen when they heard the front door unlock. Panic. Alina's heart raced as she whispered, "Hurry, go, you have to." "Go, he can't see you," Caleb nodded, grabbing his things. Alina shoved him toward the back door, heart pounding, adrenaline rushing. She kissed him once, quick, desperate. "Don't stop. Keep walking. He's almost home," she said breathlessly. The door closed. Seconds later, Daniel stepped into the house. "Hey, Mom," he called. Alina turned, breathless. "Hey, sweetheart. I didn't hear you come in." Daniel smiled. Smells like your favorite candle and coffee. You okay? She nodded too quickly. Of course, just cleaning up. But Daniel looked toward the back door, paused, his brow furrowed. Was someone here? Her stomach dropped. Just the neighbor dropped something off. He nodded slowly but didn't speak. That night, Alina sat alone in bed. The weight of it all crushed her chest. Caleb's touch still lingered on her skin, but so did her son's knowing eyes. The next day, she ended it. She met Caleb in the park far from town. She thanked him for seeing her, for making her feel. But she told him it couldn't go on. I love you, he said, voice low. I know, she whispered, but I love my family more. Even if it's broken. It took time, pain, honest conversations with Thomas, who eventually discovered bits and pieces of what had happened. He was devastated, angry, heartbroken, but strangely willing to try. I wasn't here, he admitted. And I should have been. They went to therapy, took space. Alina focused on rebuilding, not just the marriage, but herself. She found strength in owning her mistakes, in facing the pain she caused, in choosing truth. And Caleb, he left town. No drama. No final. Words, years later, Alina looked back not with pride, but with understanding. She had betrayed trust, yes, but she had also unearthed something vital. She had awakened a part of herself she can no longer ignore. Love isn't always pure. It isn't always faithful. But when it forces you to confront your truth, it can still shape you into someone better. She held on to that dot into the memory of a young man who really saw her when she had forgotten how to see herself. Elena had always thought betrayal came in sudden moments. A phone call, a message, a lie revealed. But hers had arrived slowly, like a tide. Not from Julian, and not even from herself, but from the erosion of connection, year by year, until love had started to feel like duty. But after the weekend at the coast, something within her had cracked open. And not in a destructive way, but like soil breaking apart just enough to let a seed reach light. She didn't pretend everything was healed. In the months that followed, there were still moments when she looked at Mark and remembered the years they drifted. There were moments when she caught herself wondering what might have been if she and Julian had crossed that invisible line. But more than anything, she began living with a deeper clarity about what she needed, what she craved, and what she refused to ignore anymore. Mark changed too. Not in loud, grand gestures, but in quiet, steady shifts. He started asking about her art. He showed up to her first gallery showcase, a local event, small but meaningful, and stood proudly beside her as strangers admired the self-portrait. That had once made him cry. One evening, months later, Elena was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Mark walked in, smelling of pine from the backyard, and set a small envelope on the counter. "What's this?" she asked, wiping her hands. "Open it." Inside was a brochure. An artist's retreat in Italy, a quiet village known for its light, its warmth, its ancient colors. A place she had once told him long ago she wanted to see. "I thought," Mark said, "you could go for a few weeks. Paint, write, just be." Her throat tightened. "By myself. If you want, or we can both go. I'll write from there. You'll paint. We'll drink cheap wine and get sunburnt, and maybe find out who we are now, together." She stared at him. "You remembered." "I never forgot," he said. "I just stopped listening." She went. They both did. And in that village, surrounded by unfamiliar words and golden air and paint-stained hands, Elena began to fall in love again. Not just with Mark, not just with herself, but with life. The days in the village passed slower than they were used to. Time seemed to stretch between the cobbled steps of the morning market and the amber light that painted their apartment walls every evening. Elena wandered narrow alleys with her sketchpad, stopping often, not to capture a building or a view, but to trace the feelings that rose uninvited. Loneliness, wonder, regret, hope. Sometimes all at once Mark took to writing again. Not emails or documents or work drafts, but words that didn't serve a purpose beyond expression. Sometimes he'd sit beside her at the edge of the square with a notebook in his lap, scribbling quietly while the scent of espresso curled around them. They didn't always speak, but that silence, unlike the ones from before, felt comfortable, alive. One afternoon, while Elena painted a quiet church door soaked in shadows, a woman approached her, middle-aged with a sun-lined face and bright eyes. "Bellissimo," she said, pointing at the painting. Elena smiled politely. "You two are lovers?" the woman asked, glancing over to where Mark sat, reading under a tree. Elena hesitated. "We're married." "Ah," the woman nodded. "Then you are learning each other again." The words struck Elena deeper than she expected, not falling back in love. Not repairing what had broken, but learning again. Like strangers who once knew the same language, but had since forgotten how to speak it. That night, she told Mark about the woman. He chuckled softly. "She's not wrong," he said. "I feel like I'm just now meeting parts of you that I should have known all along." She looked at him across their tiny table, the candlelight flickering between them. "And are you still in love with me? With the new me?" He didn't answer immediately. He reached across the table instead, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I think I'm more in love now than I ever was. Because now I see you, not just the version I built in my head, but all of you." She felt her eyes sting, but didn't look away. The last week of their stay, they took a long walk to a vineyard just outside the village. Rows of late summer grapes shimmered in the heat. Elena paused in the shade of an olive tree, breathless from the climb. "I used to think love was about effort," she said. "About choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. But that's only part of it." Mark waited. "It's also about freedom. Letting the other person become who they're meant to. Even if it scares you." "I was scared," he admitted, "when you pulled away. When you started painting again. When I realized I couldn't be your everything." "You were never meant to be." They stood there for a while, not holding hands, not needing to. Just sharing the moment. The heat, the quiet, the honesty of being two flawed people trying. Back home, life didn't suddenly become cinematic. The old routines returned, work, errands, busy weekends. But they carry Italy with them in the little ways. They cooked more together. They left their phones in another room during dinner. Mark framed one of her sketches, the door of the little church, and hung it near the front entrance. Julian still came up now and then, not as a ghost of temptation, but as a chapter, a reminder. Elena had once needed something he offered. Presence, attention, warmth. But she no longer ached for it the way she had before. Because now she didn't have to go searching to feel seen, and yet healing was not linear. There were days Mark's insecurity resurfaced, when he asked questions with too much weight behind them, when he withdrew out of old fear, and there were days Elena felt the pull of restlessness again, the ache for something more than routine. But they talked, more than they ever had. Some nights, they still fell asleep back to back. But on most, they reached for each other, a hand on the shoulder, a quiet goodnight, the familiar rhythm of breath. One autumn evening, nearly a year after the storm of it all, Elena returned home from our second gallery show. It hadn't been a massive success. A few sales, a few compliments. But it had been hers. Fully Mark had made dinner. Candles flickered on the table. She walked in, took off her coat, and stared at the little scene he'd set. Quiet music playing, her favorite. Wine already open. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said, walking over and kissing her forehead. "But I wanted to." They ate slowly, laughter threading between sips of wine and stories about awkward conversations with collectors. Later, curled on the couch, Elena traced circles on Mark's arm. "You know," she said quietly, "you saved us." He shook his. "No, he saved us." And it was true, because what they had now wasn't the same love from before. It wasn't shiny and full of easy joy. It was worn and shaped by mistakes and choices, stitched together by time, truth, and a fragile kind of forgiveness. But it was real. And sometimes that was enough. The weeks turned into months. And with each passing day, Elena and Mark built something that felt more lasting than what they had before. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because they were finally honest. Present and willing to grow together, Elena kept painting. Her evenings became moments of quiet joy, brushes dancing across canvases, music low in the background, her mind uncluttered by guilt or confusion. She even started showing her work at a small local gallery. Mark came to every showing. He never tried to offer critique, but he watched her like she was rediscovering a part of herself, and he cherished every piece of it. Julian remained in her life, though from a safe, respectful distance. They spoke only when necessary at work. The spark that once threatened to unravel her life had softened into mutual respect and quiet understanding. Sometimes he'd pass her in the hallway and nod. She'd nod back. It was enough. Closure didn't always need words. One evening, after dinner and a long walk, Mark took her to the attic, a space they hadn't used in years. The dust was thick, and the air smelled of old boxes and memories. In one corner, under a cloth, was a large canvas. Elena didn't recognize it at first. "I found this the other day," Mark said, brushing it off. "Your first painting after we got married. I forgot how much color you used to use." She looked at it, surprised. "It was wild, free, messy, but alive. I want to see more of that," he said. "In your art, in us." That night, they lit candles not for romance, but for warmth. They curled into each other on the couch. No TV, no distractions. Just stories from their past and hopes for the future. Mark reached for her hand. "Do you still believe in us?" Elena nodded. "I believe in who we're becoming." And that was enough. Years later, when Elena would tell this story, not to everyone, just to those who needed to hear it, she wouldn't call it a story of infidelity. She'd call it a story of awakening, of choice, of the courage it takes to admit when love needs to be relearned, because love doesn't always arrive in fireworks. Sometimes it returns like a whisper, like a hand reaching for yours in the dark, like two people deciding every day to try again and again. With Grace and for Elena and Mark, that was the love that endured.